Hello. Before this video begins, I would like to warn you viewers that the Blood and Gore DLC was active in this video, so it may get a bit graphic and brutal. So viewer discretion is advised because it may not be for everyone. Now that that's out of the way, we can begin. Hello and welcome to episode 5 of the Rome 2 Unfortified Town Defense Battles. In today's video, which is the last video of this series, we are going over the Arverni, which are a northern tribe on the map in Rome 2. I will be trying to show you how to use their units to your advantage, common units they have, and how to maximize their potential in defensive battles against great odds or multiple enemies. Now, of course, this video isn't going to go over every single enemy or every single unit. This is just going to go over the basics and the enemies you are most likely to encounter early on and quite quickly. The other enemies you might encounter will be reviewed in my previous videos from this series, which I recommend for you to watch because I didn't go over every single faction or every single unit. I only went over the most basic key points to go over the same amount of information, since a lot of the factions share similar unit rosters. So let's get into it. The first battle we are going over today is against a fellow tribe, the Iceni. Now I decided to go over a fellow tribe because, well, to expand you're going to have to fight fellow tribes. I mean, you're in the north, you're in these forests and mountains, and the only thing around you are a faction of Greeks, the Romans, and mainly, for the most part, it's the Barbarians or the other tribes near you. So I thought, you know what, why not show you how to fight someone of your similar unit rosters. So let's get started. So as always, I try to block off the main choke points where I expect the most resistance. So here I decided to put all of my soldiers, most of my soldiers here at this front area here, because it is stopping the enemy from reaching my victory point, and the only way for them to get it without going through my men is to go all the way around, which will give me plenty of time to maneuver around and prepare for that attack. Now, I'm not expecting them to flank because the way they're positioned, the AI usually just charges in right where they're positioned, so if they were right in front of us, they'll charge in that way, so back there isn't really much of a threat. But just in case, I do have my general's unit, which is a very strong unit, in the back and not on the front line, not only so the general isn't at risk, but also so we have a backup just in case we do get flanked, because the general units are usually very strong and can be a great fighting force. So I also have a cavalry unit here. Now the cavalry here is not only to protect the flank, but to also take out the enemy cavalry and skirmishers, because missile units can be a huge threat to any army. With missile units, the enemy can take you out, even your strongest men, at range, without you being able to do anything about it. All you're able to do is just chase them, and they'll likely outrun you until they reach the end of the map. So, I have the strongest units lined up where I expect the most resistance. So I have my heavy melee infantry, where I expect the most enemy units to come through, and my weaker units where I expect a bit less resistance. But still, I am equally prepared by having my general's unit where the weakest part of the flank is, so they are ready to charge in if needed and if we're not being flanked. Now, of course, what I like to do is just to put them into the formation they have available, so it's either the shield wall, the hoplite wall, or the phalanx formation for all of these factions. Whatever formation it is, I usually like to put them in if it's a defensive action, because if it's a defensive action, it, well, braces them for the impact and lets them fight better. If you were to charge into the enemy, I'd recommend not being in that formation because it will slow you down, drain your stamina, and just be a worse thing to do. So now, my primary objective is to block up the enemy in such a way that they're forced to engage with my infantry. By doing this, This allows my cavalry an easy maneuverability to hit the enemy's weakest units and most vulnerable units with little resistance, while also allowing our skirmishers to shoot over our men's heads and into the enemy ranks. Now, the enemy has some chariots moving up, which could be a moderate threat level if left alone. Luckily for us, we have cavalry on standby, which will easily be ready to decimate them. But now the front line is starting to collide. Now, luckily for us, the AI, when they see that they're about to get hit with missile units or ranged weapons, they try to back away like here, which gives us a perfect advantage. Now, a player would likely not do this because you're just opening up your back to the enemy. But if you're facing against the AI, it is a very likely thing that they may do that. And if they do, it will be a huge advantage, because it allows you to hit the enemy in the back and gives you more time before they finally arrive to engage in hand-to-hand combat. Now, usually when dealing with chariots, you probably want to just send in a few cavalry units to take them out. So what I'm trying to do now is I'm just trying to encircle the enemy to try and not only draw back attention so they leave away my cavalry, but also to quickly deal with this main force here. Now, the enemy, what I had not noticed at this time, I was maneuvering my two heavy units all the way to the back to try and reinforce. What I had not noticed was the enemy had started to turn around, like a sort of sneak attack at the last second, to try and trick me into giving up my position. And I had done just that. But luckily I had noticed it just in time and was able to send my units back before something bad happened. So we quickly engaged the enemy units with our own units. So you always want to respond to what the enemy throws at you. You want to be ready to maneuver your troops around. You always want to have that extra bit of room left to move your troops around, just in case you need a flank or get out of the way or something like that. And as you see, the cavalry is a huge bonus. Just by charging in 2 units, one unit routes immediately and 2 units start wavering. And all 3 of them begin routing. Now, when you have that opportunity, you cannot let it go. So I decided to continue charging in my cavalry to try and maximize the damage we did. And as you see, another unit started to waver, and they only took barely any casualties. Now, unfortunately, they still came back to fight us, but we had done a heavy blow by this time. So I decided to just send in my cavalry to allow them to regain some stamina and chase down some enemy units while the infantry handles the main job. So the battle has been mostly won at this point, because the front line is holding, we are not flanked, the enemy has lost a lot of units, and our cavalry did a fatal blow into the enemy's back. By charging into the back, it broke their formation, and it lowered their morale, which was absolutely terrible as we saw routing 3 of their units. So a cavalry charge, or even an infantry charge in the back, is always a good thing to do, especially when you're stuck like this fighting in a front line that isn't moving around much. A cavalry or any hit in the back will quickly finish that off. Now, I wanted to just charge in here and finish this off, but I saw that my infantry was holding quite well and getting plenty of kills, so I decided, no, I'm going to send in my cavalry to take out the enemy missile units. Now, I wasn't sure what the enemy had here. I thought all I could see was 2 missile units, and I thought, okay, well, there's one of 2 things the AI could be doing. One, it's just these missile units here standing and shooting, or 2, as we saw in previous videos, the AI has multiple infantry melee units standing on guard in front of the missile units to protect them. Luckily for us, they didn't do that. So they only had missile units back here, which made them easy targets for our cavalry, which made short work of them, and made sure they wouldn't torment our units on the front line anymore. And seeing as so many men were lost, and they were getting flanked and cornered, they decided to rout, or retreat. And that was basically this battle. The enemy lost quite a good amount of men, and we've barely been touched, really. We lost a few men here and there, but overall, this is probably almost a perfect outcome. It went so well because we had a firm front line where we expected the most resistance, which is exactly what you need to do, blocking off these corridors. What we could have done is probably move up into this wooded area up here to try and hold them off, but seeing how the enemy was positioned, they could have easily flanked us to the left, and I didn't want to draw their attention to the left side so it wouldn't be as easy to surround us. So holding a front line here was a good idea. Now also having the cavalry in the back was useful. It stopped the enemy units from flanking, and if they did flank, we would be given more time because the cavalry would distract them while the units got in position. But if they did win the battle during the flanking maneuvers, they could easily move around back and flank themselves with a counterattack to take out the enemy skirmishers, missile units, or even cavalry, infantry, or even general. So this is basically the same strategy as always. Now what's great about the Arverni, and probably a lot of the other tribes, is that they almost all of the units have ranged weapons with them. So before the enemy charges in, it allows them to throw a bit, which heavily decreases the enemy's morale and can do a good amount of damage, sometimes even routing 1 or 2 units in the process. So that makes them highly efficient at holding a front line, because it stops the enemy charge for a bit more, and they're pretty good fighters, honestly. As we saw here, they were of similar skill and experience, and even the units used were very similar, and yet we managed to do that, not only because we flanked them and hit them in the back where they were the most vulnerable, but also because we gave that extra throw of ranged weapons. And as you see, this is a decisive victory. So let's see the outcome in terms of casualties. And this was truly a great day. Not only were we outnumbered, and they had a few units that were much better than ours, but we actually ended up winning this battle. So taking only 246 losses. Now, as we notice that the enemy has only done 229 kills, that means there was a bit of friendly fire. But seeing how great of a victory this was, it will be kind of forgiven. I mean, this is truly amazing to take so few casualties in a battle that we're outnumbered and we're evenly matched, you could say. So this is probably the ideal situation. Have a strong front line that's able to push back and even counterattack very quickly an enemy attack, but also have skirmishers that are very precise, as we see here. They can easily shoot into the enemy ranks over our men, or even behind the enemy and shoot into their backs. And then finally, the great cavalry units that charge around and deal the finishing blow, but also help chase down any routing units. So now let's move on to the second battle for today. Now in this battle, I thought to myself, well, eventually in your conquest, you're probably going, or certainly going to face off against the Roman army. So why not give you an example on how to fight them? So once again, what we will be doing is forming a strong front line, trying to use our skirmishers and cavalry to our advantage, and then finally use the ranged weapons that most of our infantry units have to push back any enemy attacks. So let's get started. I'll further explain a bit more as the battle unfolds. So I had 2 places where I could set up, either here on the left or here on the right. Now playing on a map that has a very similar layout, I know that the enemy usually likes going around the right, but always sends a few units to the left to flank around. So I thought, I'm going to put the majority of my force where I expect the most resistance, as always. So seeing as they were formed up here, they could easily go down to try and flank us, but since it was so far away, they're more likely to go down the faster path, as the AI usually does. Then what I did is I tried to have my cavalry try and ambush the enemy units. Now originally it was just planned to ambush the enemy missile units, because by taking them out our front line would not have to have a great threat in the way anymore. Because although the Romans have a good army, and most of the factions have a really good army, missile units can be absolutely devastating. If they find a good position to shoot into, they can absolutely destroy a lot of units, even if they're the best units you have. So while that battle was going on with the cavalry, what I decided to do is have 2 units here on the left side. Now the point of them was to stop any enemy encirclements, but also if the enemy had not decided to encircle us, they would move around just as this to the left side and try to encircle the enemy themselves. So if the enemy didn't do it, we'd do it. And if the enemy did it, we just counterattack and still do it. As you see, this was quite the risky situation with our cavalry here. We were starting to take a bit of a beating, not yet, but the casualties were starting to mount up, but the enemy was sending more and more units, and seeing that these are Vigiles, which have spears, which are a very good counter to cavalry, most spears are good counter to cavalry, I needed to move out of the way. Luckily for me, the Roman cavalry decided to follow, which made them a very easy target. It spread them apart from the main force that was stopping me from continuing my attack. So since they were following me, I thought, you know what, I might as well finish them now, so they have less opportunities and less maneuverability later on in the battle. Now the Romans are trying to charge in, but we have ranged weapons which will try and push back. Unfortunately, it was enough this time, so the Vigiles do, and Hastati do, reach into hand-to-hand combat. And the cavalry is doing just as intended. It has taken out the enemy cavalry unit, and is constantly drawing the enemy units apart, which is spreading apart their formation, making them much easier targets, so we can kill them faster, surround them faster, and deal with them much easier. And as you see, we've already dealt with the 2 units that had charged in, with practically no casualties. And if you're wondering how was this done? Well, this is because of the ranged weapons. By throwing the ranged weapons, it heavily decreased the morale. And furthermore, by engaging in hand-to-hand combat and having so many soldiers, it was just overwhelming for the Roman soldiers. They may be well trained and well prepared for battle, but a single soldier can't hold out against 60 for that long. That wasn't the exact ratio, but that's just an example of showing that against great odds, eventually the numbers will be forced to win just over attrition. So with the cavalry unit that still has about half of its men left, I continue bombarding and trying to hit the enemy in the back as much as possible. And surprisingly, after that first push and our counterattack, the enemy has stopped, completely grinded to a halt in their attack. So, you always need to take risks, and that includes moving up. You always need to move up and try and fight back. By moving up constantly, you are putting pressure upon the enemy line. This forces the enemy to react or have their men easily trapped. So usually, if not always, they do react. And now, this is the perfect opportunity to strike. The enemy is engaged in hand-to-hand combat with our infantry, and this gives our cavalry a great opportunity. This allows them to charge in the back with nothing to stop them. And as you see, this can be a devastating blow. not only wreaking havoc upon the formation, but also killing many men and even wavering the unit in the process. Now, I wanted my cavalry to stay here and just finish off this unit, but seeing as this unit still had quite a few men and didn't seem to be wavering at this time, I knew I had to pull my cavalry out and let the infantry deal with it for now, or at least until my cavalry got another charge in the back ready. And on the front lines here on the left and right, nothing seems to be happening. The enemy keeps moving in for an attack, but gets easily pushed back with their ranged weapons. But then I decide to take the risks. A risk that may lead us to defeat or victory. If we were to charge in here now, it would catch the enemy by surprise. They wouldn't be expecting it, they'd be unprepared. And if we do it correctly, we could easily wipe them out and completely spearhead through and get to the other side. But the bad thing about this is we have left the safety of the buildings on the left and right side. This meant we could easily be flanked around and encircled, which could, if done correctly, could easily wipe out and rout all of these units. Unfortunately, the AI did not only have not enough troops, but also not enough will to achieve this. And seeing as the enemy was engaged in combat and wasn't really reacting much, I decided to fully engage on both sides. So on the left side, we were just trying to flank with our cavalry and hit them in the back, while our infantry did most of the work. And on the right side, it was just a matter of holding out long enough for the cavalry and other infantry units to break through and flank as well. And now it's just 2 units left to try and fight back. And as you see, the enemy, they might have great number in their units, and their units might be well trained and well prepared. But unfortunately for them, they are no match for the barbarians. And with more and more of their units routing, the entire force eventually gives up, achieving us complete victory. Once again, this was a great battle with probably almost minimal casualties and great enemy casualties. Now, the goal of every battle is to either you probably want to win the battle, so you keep the settlement and you have some of your men alive. But sometimes it's not really worth it. Sometimes you just have to go in and deal with it. So that includes, sometimes includes losing the battle, maybe on purpose, maybe not on purpose. Maybe you gave it your best shot and you lost. But sometimes you need to lose these battles. So you do so much damage to the enemy forces that they are absolutely crushed, and it will take them a very long time and a lot of resources to recover later on. So for example, it'd be better to lose this town and to absolutely, almost completely wipe out the enemy force, rather than stay alive with barely any men and allow another army to come and clear us out. Because it'd be better because they'd have to spend their resources on rebuilding everything they lost, while for us it's just a city. We can come with an army and everything's back to normal. So let's see how many we got killed. And as you see, this is also a very good outcome. Taking only 290 casualties, about 30 of those were friendly fire, but killing over 1,300 soldiers. Now this is, once again, one of those rare outcomes that goes really well. We were outnumbered by about 40 men, which doesn't really make much of a difference. We were both equally prepared. Hastati can be a force to be reckoned with if used correctly, and they also had cavalry, principes, vigilets, and missile units, and all that together can be a very good army. Now, unfortunately for them, we were in command, and we had a better strategy. Well, this battle went quite well, and it might not always go like this, but this is the ultimate goal. Trying to surround the enemy forces while having your strong front line to hold out while you try and flank around and surround the enemy. Once they are surrounded, you can easily pick them off, and if you can't pick them off, you will at least inflict very heavy damage. So I hope this video was helpful in playing as the Arverni tribe yourself, or maybe even as other tribes. because like I said earlier, this doesn't apply to this one faction, it applies to all the factions that share a similar unit roster. So this should be helpful if you play as any of the other tribes in the north. So I really hope this was helpful and you enjoyed this series. My next series will be about Total War Warhammer 2, since there's constantly new DLCs, and the third game's about to come out, probably in a few months, so we might as well get into it since a lot of people will probably be getting back into the game, or just buying the game to get started with it, so I thought, you know what, that's what we'll go over, so we can help them too. So thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed watching this, and I hope to see you next time. Goodbye.